Hello gamers! Today we're going to be looking at the Arcanist class. I've spent quite a bit of time on the PTS recently just testing out the class, goofing off with different setups, builds, and I'm here to give my opinions on it because you guys wanted me to, okay? I wasn't sure if I wanted to because plenty of other opinions are out there, but I guess you guys think my opinion is moderately relevant or something, so here we go. Just so you guys know, my opinion of this class may be a bit more based towards PvP, since that is the kind of content I enjoy doing in this game, but I'll still talk about both aspects for PvP and PvE, and where I see it. So going in to test the Arcanist completely blind, I was expecting the class to be extraordinarily overpowered in every single aspect because of the previous rap sheets of each of the other classes having something very, very strong and desirable upon launch of the DLC, so that way people would buy the class. But the only places I found it really overperformed was in its healing kit and its defensive kit. It has a very, very, very solid defense and healing kit, so it's very good at playing supporting roles, but when it comes to damage, that is where the problem begins. The Arcanist offensive kit is extraordinarily weak, but since this is a review, we're going to be looking at every single aspect of the class, so I guess let's first start with the things that I enjoy the most about the class, and then we'll move into the skills and its defining roles and talk about those. So the main thing I really enjoy about the class is its visuals and sound effects. I think ZeniMax did an amazing job by giving this class an amazing visual identity. Like, if you're looking at class buffs and how the class looks while it's in combat, there's going to be no mistaking that you are fighting an Arcanist or someone is using the Arcanist as their class, and I think ZeniMax did an amazing job with the animations and the sound effects. I mean, just listen and look. And I can't stress to you enough on the PTS how often I'm just running around the map, exploring, and just recasting my armor buff because it's so satisfying to use. It's not your generic where he just does his little thing and then the armor buff comes out of his back. Instead, it's a whole new animation with a new sound effect, and it's just really satisfying to be casting abilities on the class. And I think I enjoy that aspect about the class the most. One thing I will say about the visual effects, though, is they do go a bit too hard, and I don't know how they're going to work on older generation consoles like the PS4 and, you know, the Xbox One, because those consoles and all the visual effects that are coming with the Arcanist might just crash the game, because on the PTS, the game is extraordinarily laggy if there's a lot of Arcanists nearby, because there's so many things going on screen. So I don't know how that's going to work, but, you know, nonetheless. The other thing I found enjoyable about the class was the goofy playstyle of the class. ZeniMax kept stressing in one of their things that the class has to play different or whatever, and it definitely does, but this is also to its detriment, which I'll talk about in a little bit when it comes to its class abilities and stuff. But overall, I think the idea for the class itself is very interesting. It definitely needs some work if it's going to perform well in the current state of the game, because as it sits right now, I think the Arcanist can squeeze in without any changes, but it definitely needs some changes if it's going to be even close to viable when it goes live. So looking at the skill lines by themselves, you can see that ZeniMax once again has gone for having one dedicated skill line for each of the 3 roles that you can play. So one for offense, one for defense, and one for support. And I'm not sure I really like this formula, because when it comes to playing a class, I like to be able to pick and choose between each of them and just being able to have damage from everything, or, you know, some survivability from everything, and seeing how things work together. I'm just trying to say that I don't really enjoy that kind of formula where one skill line is dedicated to a specific role, but I guess it does make it easier for newer players to understand kind of where things are in the class. So I mean, maybe that's just my opinion, but as a whole, the class kind of just feels mishmashed together when it comes to these skill lines as a result of it trying to just do everything at once, so tanking, healing, and damage, and it just makes it really weird. And another thing that is really weird about the class, since we're about to look at the skills anyways and just talk about the skill lines a little bit more, is that it takes... Okay, so basically what it does, right, is if you have a higher stamina pool, most of your resources will end up costing stamina. If you have a higher magic pool, most of your resources will end up costing magic. And I do not like it. I know they're trying to make it more of a hybrid-focused class, but it does not really work very well. And it is yet another reason why sustain is so bad, despite the fact that you have, like, so many built-in passives that are supposed to boost your sustain. Basically, Arcanist just has a lot of really high looking numbers, but most of it's not super practical except for the resistances because, you know, well, resistances, they're strong, but it has really, really good recoveries on the stat sheet, but it's kind of equaled out by how expensive the abilities are to cast. So there's that. I guess let's go ahead and look at each of the skill lines. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to be breaking down every single one of the skills in depth or whatever. I'm just going to be going over the skill lines, talking about the generalized playstyles and how I found them to be very useful for me or things that they could be improved upon, and then talking about some key skills that I think are really cool and different and should have some, you know, notoriety or whatever. So let's look at its defensive skill line, the Soldier of Apocrypha skill line. This is your tanking skill line, and the playstyle around this revolves off of what your health looks like. So basically your shield strength is determined by your max health, which is very interesting, and other things can happen based off of what is happening to your health. If you're taking damage, you can apply debuffs to your target, or if you go below a certain threshold of health, you get a burst heal, all that kind of stuff. This is your tanking skill line, and it really does benefit the most if you are a tank and you're building off of maximum health. And I do think it's an interesting take to really focus on using damage shields as your primary source of damage mitigation if you're going to be playing a tank. But the problem with this is when it comes to PvP, shield stacking and damage shields in general have always been extraordinarily strong in PvP, because what you're doing with damage shields is basically you're just pressing a button and doubling your health bar when it comes to damage shields. So this is a bit strong in the defensive department when it comes to PvP, especially when you just passively get a bunch of armor for literally doing absolutely nothing. Like, just on a regular Sunday afternoon, just chilling at 30k armor, and I'm literally doing absolutely nothing for no reason. It has a lot of just built-in armor where maybe it could be tuned down a little bit because it has a really massive amount of armor that you can get with this. But, you know, at the same time, you are building for your damage shields and stuff, so that extra mitigation does help make sure your shields don't break as easily. And the abilities for this are very expensive, but still, I think they could drop the amount of free armor that you get for just existing, but, you know, keep the shields relatively the same, because once you start combining your actual defense, like, number mitigation, so your physical and spell resistance, with damage shields, and when they can get up that high for literally doing nothing, then you start having a problem. And maybe you scale down some of the shields, especially like Impervious Ward here, Mr. I don't ever want to die ever because I pressed one button. And this ultimate as well, like, it's really strong. It does have a little bit of counterplay, but it's kind of like corrosive armor. It's just, this defensive skill line is very solid, I'd say, and, you know, I do like it. It's definitely an interesting way to play when it comes to being able to survive. And one other thing I'm going to talk about is this Rune of Uncanny Adoration, or, you know, you're just, Eldritch Horror stun, whatever. Just a very interesting stun. It's got a 1 second delay, and then it fears the target. It cannot be dodged, but it can be blocked. I think for this ability, it needs to have a 2 second delay, so that way you can time it up with a better burst combo. Like, for example, I thought I could use this very well with Dolomesh, but the problem with this is your heavy attack channels take like 2 seconds, and this is a 1 second delay, so by the time you get the stun off, and you're like halfway through channeling a heavy attack, they'll just be breaking free and roll dodging, so they're not going to take any damage from it. I think this ability, if it had a 2 second delayed stun, would be absolutely perfect, so for either morph. But the charm on this morph is very nice, because the charm just brings your target to you when you stun them, and you can do some funny things with it as well. But yeah, I think overall this defensive skill line is extraordinarily solid, and it may need a little bit of tuning when it comes to the amount of free armor that you're just getting for existing, and maybe tune the shields down just a little bit, like maybe 5-10%. But overall, this is a super duper solid skill line, and it does fit together very well on the Arcanist, I'd say. When it comes to the Arcanist support kit and Curative rune forms, the best way I can summarize it is it's just a mishmash of abilities that don't really pair well together at all. And it's outshined by one extraordinarily overpowered healing ability that, like, is way too overtuned for what it is. It's a channel, basically costs nothing, and gives you like 50k health for existing as well while you're channeling it. It is extraordinarily strong, and I say the abilities in this class skill line don't get along too well because there's like no synergy between them. You'll have like one of these abilities slotted on your bar at max if you're playing like some sort of PvP damage build or whatever, and that's about it. because this burst heal is extraordinarily mid. It's not even a burst heal, it's like a small heal over time, and it's not even that effective because you have 3 instances of healing, which each have a chance to crit instead of just one massive heal coming in all at once that can crit for a really large amount. Instead, you break that up into a 3 burst heal thing, and it just doesn't work well. So the burst heal on this class is very, very weak, and instead you end up getting your burst heal from, you know, the impervious ward when you consume your crux to heal yourself. So this ability could use some work. Instead of making it 3 times, it could be all at once. And like I said, the other abilities, they just don't have a lot of synergy. You can give your teammates like a lot of minor buffs and stuff, and I think this ability is very interesting and nice, but like I should be able to stand in it and have like a buff to my damage shields or something as well. So when I use this ability on an ally, they don't take like a super weak damage shield that literally gives them nothing. Or like while the heal over time for this ability is active, my damage shield strength is increased by 10% to me and the allies that I'm putting it on. So that way you could drop the 10% from this class skill line. So like debuff the shields by like 10%, take 10% off of all these shields, and instead put it on like this ability or this ability, so that way you could get that strength back. But there's a condition that you have to meet in order for that to happen. Just something like that, because these abilities, they don't synergize very well, and the passives, they are pretty strong, but you know, there's just not a lot of reason to use them in conjunction with each other than just use the one overpowered healing spell. So yeah. And the ultimate is interesting too, but I don't really like it. It's really expensive, and you have to take your focus off of your target in order to get this to work. So, you know, unless you have a strictly AoE build, or, you know, a healing AoE build, this is kind of weird. So yeah, buff this skill, nerf the shields on this, and then put that 10% damage somewhere on here so I can have like a synergy with this class skill line. I think would be a good choice. But overall, it's a decent healing kit. If we're not talking about this ability right here makes it SSS plus tier healing kit, because this is ridiculously strong for absolutely no reason. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this healing kit. When it comes to the Arcanist offensive kit, so the Herald of the Tome, it is extraordinarily underwhelming and very, very underpowered for what it possibly could be. A lot of these abilities look like they could be a lot of fun to use, and they were when I was first testing the class, but when you actually try and make a practical build out of it, you find that you need to go outside of your class's skill line to find damage, either through proc sets or, you know, weapon abilities, and that's just not something that is generally healthy for any class, because if you need to go outside of your class's skill line to find a reliable spammable or any sort of good damage, then something is not right with the class's abilities by themselves. And this class plays at a medium range, so it is very friendly when it comes to what weapon style you want to use. And I like that about this class, that it is strictly a medium-ish ranged class, but it doesn't really work well when the abilities themselves don't do enough damage, okay? So like your main spammable, for example, the only reason I use this ability at all and not something like Bloodthirst or Wrecking Blow or Force Pulse is because this is a very reliable way to generate 3 stacks of Crux very quickly, which I can use to buff my other abilities. If it did not generate Crux reliably as quickly as it did, and instead I had that on another ability, I would not be using this ability, period, simply because it does not do enough damage. And also, why does this ability increase the crit chance for just this ability alone, instead of just giving me straight up savagery, so that way I can have just better crit chance for everything I do and not just this specific ability? Like, skill line just feels mishmashed, kind of like the healing ability. And yeah, sure, the Crux is supposed to be like your big synergy between each of your offensive abilities, but they just don't fit together very well, because your main ability that they really want you to use is a channel, and the channel itself is just... Channels have always been weird, and this channel was not done right. It has okay damage, but it either needs to go one of 2 ways. It either needs a lot more damage, or it needs some built-in defense alongside it while you're channeling it. It's like, so you heal for 50% of the damage that you deal on top of getting major protection while channeling this ability. So it's really weird. It has potential to work, but channeling abilities in ESO, especially like PvP, it's always just been really weird. So yeah, not very good. And the same thing with this one. I had high hopes for this ability. This does not have enough damage to be useful. This ability is perfect as it is. This is like the best offensive ability on the class. It does its job, and I can see the place that it needs to be, and it does it very well. But that's about the only good ability in this skill line that I'd actually use, because like I'm not using this on every single build if I can get away with it. I'm not going to use this on every single build if I can get away with it when it comes to doing damage. I'm not going to use this on every single build when I can get away with it somewhere else. This, it's really hard to argue with because it's really decent, but I'd like to see it so the magic damage does go outside of just class abilities, because like I said, the class abilities themselves are just very, very weak and underwhelming, and I think overall this class needs a lot more damage on its base abilities, or something in the passives needs to change so that way you can actually do like more percentage based damage to make up for what you don't have in base damage on your abilities. And the ultimate is weird too. It doesn't work and it's too expensive. But yeah, I like this passive here. This is like the old Warden passive where you get more pin for the abilities that you have slotted. Just very nice, but that's not going to help with just having very, very low base damage when it comes to your abilities. And like I said, they don't synergize well, and the flow of the combat with this ability is just really weird. And if you want to be successful when it comes to being able to deal damage, you basically just toss on every other meta set known to man and, you know, go outside of your class to find other abilities that will work much better than what they're trying to give you with this. Okay, so I don't like it. It needs some improvements. They need to synergize better, and they need more damage. So yeah, there you go. Offensive skill line is very, very mid, not very good. Like for reference, this is literally Rune blades. That's literally no damage. And one final thing I was going to add, but I can't go and get footage for it because the PTS is not working, so hopefully whatever the heck is going on in the PTS where I can't log in doesn't go on the live server because the PTS is weird and just... Okay, Zenimax, this is not right, but anyways, is that everyone, in order to do damage, for PvP at least, is literally running the exact same build. You either are wearing Mara's and Draugr, Mechanical Acuity, and Sea Serpent is always going to need to be on the build simply because your class itself just lacks any ability to do damage. I thought I was being the most creative guy in the world when it came to, oh, there's a 1 second delay on the fear, so I can time that up with fully charged heavy attack and get Dolamesh to finally work, because if you don't know that set, it's really difficult to find a situation where that set can actually work properly. But I know it's a PTS and everyone's super sweaty for duels for some reason instead of actually trying to test things, but I just wanted to bring it up because I feel like this is just a product of, you know, the fact that the class itself doesn't have any good mainline damage, so instead you just stack Draugr with Force Pulse or Bloodthirst and a bunch of dots, so that way you can actually do damage because the class itself doesn't have any good damage. And yeah, my thoughts on the Arcanist overall is it can fit in very well. It definitely needs some work, and I know this is literally week 1 of the PTS, about to go into week 2, so there is time for things to change. But my first impressions of this class is it's not what I thought it would be, and I think it could do a lot better. It's got a very solid support and defensive kit. Could use a little bit of work and some tuning, but its offensive kit is extremely underwhelming and definitely needs to get looked at and adjusted so that way it actually has a good place when the class goes live. But yeah, overall the class is mid, and keep in mind, this is literally week 1 of the PTS, and so much could change about this class, and I really do hope that it does, especially when it comes to its offensive power, so just keep that in mind. And yeah, I wouldn't worry about it being the most overpowered classes of all time. Maybe the healing kit, if it doesn't get nerfed, is going to make it the most overpowered support class of all time, but other than that, I think for now, with some improvements, this class could move in the right direction and fit in very nicely. And yeah, I don't have much else to say, guys. So, those are my thoughts on the class, and have a good night.